So we're working through those best we can. Please, if you're interested, you know, anyone that might be interested, have a look at the HR website and put your application in. We're trying to move through those as promptly as we can. In the meantime, we've adjusted some of our like setup processes to try to make sure that we stay on top of everything, trying to stay within that 3 to 5 day turnaround time for the whole award process, setup process. If you have something that needs to be expedited, please send us an email. You can email CGA Awards to get it to a group that will look at that quickly. A fun thing that we've been working on, and many of you in the departments have been working on, is our UC path implementation / transition. So, you know, that again is it's moving along. Things are getting fixed and enhanced. But what I'd like to ask is, when you are doing high-risk transfers, those are transfers that are either 90 days past the end, an award end date, or 120 days from the original transaction date, pay period date, that you please provide us with the complete information related to that transfer request. Remember, those high-risk transfers now are initiated at the department level and are routed through contracts and grants accounting, as opposed to the old process, which was we had to do them. So, but the problem is we are not seeing really good information on these documents that are coming in some, not across the board, but it's kind of hit and miss. But we really do need a full, complete justification of why this is an appropriate late transfer. Just for curiosity, before coming over, I popped open a document that's sitting on our queue, and the boxes that you filled out said, you know, see attached for, you know, all the justification, see attached, see attached. I opened up the attachment and someone had scribbled on it, looks like we missed the deadline. This is not quite sufficient. So you got to tell us what happened, why was it late, why, you know, what are we doing so that we don't have this situation again, the whole story. That is aside from what I've indicated before, that if we do have the need to do late high-risk transfers that are resulting from, you know, the UC path transition issues, that's fine. Just indicate what's going on. We're not going to block them because there was some kind of, you know, system glitch that stopped something from going through. And once that got worked through, then that's great. We'll let those flow through. So does that sound okay? I'm looking at a bunch of, right, everyone in the room here. Okay, last thing I just want to mention, I was at the FDP meeting in January, and one thing I heard from multiple agencies when they were doing their presentations, and then has kind of been proven out by some inquiries we've had from the NIH in the last month or so, is that they're really focused on, you know, quote unquote burn rates. How are we spending the money? Are we spending the money kind of in a timeline that makes sense to them? You know, are we getting our invoices in? So we get our invoices in based on the expenses that hit the ledger, or we do our cash draws based on the expenses that have posted. If the expenses aren't there, then we aren't invoicing, we aren't drawing, and therefore you could have some red flags going up saying, what's going on? You're halfway through this project and you've only spent 10% of the money, or whatever it is, with the idea that maybe they would like to repurpose those funds and either pull some of it back, or maybe not, you know, award the continuation funding, or whatever those things are. So please just do be mindful of that. You want to have your expenses on the books promptly. And that is what I wanted to highlight this morning. And do we have any questions?
Nothing here.
Sit down.
Yeah, I think when you sit down.
Yes, that's the, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Craig Allison, our Director of Office of Research Compliance, discussing a couple of different issues, hot issues these days.
Hot issues. Okay. So good morning, everybody. I'm Craig Allison, the Director of Research Compliance. As I think a lot of you know, James' prohibition on more than 2 questions reminds me of a joke, a lawyer joke. A potential client goes to the lawyer and says, "Can I ask you how much you charge?" The lawyer says $400 an hour. The potential client says, "Gosh, that's a little steep, isn't it?" And the lawyer said, "Yes, it is. What's your 3rd question?" Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I guess I would call it kind of a part 2 from some of the materials Cindy discussed last time regarding kind of international activities and outside activities, a little bit more generally than just international activities. I only heard a portion of what she talked about, so there may be a bit of overlap, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to, like Ahmad said, some of the hot issues, particularly with the government focusing in these areas, I think it's important to just put a little bit more meat on the bones, I guess is the way to do it, or say it. So I'm sure Cindy said this, but as a general point, international collaborations in terms of their value and being encouraged by senior management from the dean, from the chancellor down has not changed at all. Vitally important, and will continue to be so in the eyes of the university. But the government, at least, and there are some instances, is now saying, well, because of some of these relationships, there may be issues of national security that we have to take a look at. So some of you may have already heard, perhaps in the press, speaking of what the government's doing, there have been at least 2 prosecutions of faculty, Kansas and Harvard, where the government basically is alleging, again, in a federal criminal prosecution, that the faculty member or researcher failed to disclose certain outside activities, and in these indictments, it's foreign activities that were required to be disclosed to the university and or the government. Well, you can debate, and I have, whether that's jumping to a criminal prosecution that soon is warranted, and whether this is a good use of federal tax dollars. And that's a discussion for a different day, maybe over a beer, because I have views on that. But it's here, and we have to take it serious, as I know you all agree. And so the overall kind of, I guess, point I want you to take away with, and I don't think anybody disagrees with it, but it's basically this, and that is, if in doubt, disclose, or if in doubt, come to us and we'll work with you as to whether you have to disclose or your researchers have to disclose it. And this language is not mine. This comes from a new NIH guidance document. And they specifically answer the question of what do I do if I'm in doubt? Err in sight of transparency. I am rarely seeing, certainly here at UC Davis, anybody who's acting intentionally, nefarious and wrongdoing and so on, all this IP theft. But what I can tell you is, as NIH continues to issue its guidance, which it claims hasn't changed the prior rules, but again, we could debate later whether that's true. I think there is some expansion. We're getting innocent researchers, both here and other universities, wrapped up in this when they actually didn't know they had to disclose that. So again, pulling it back to, if in doubt, come to us or disclose, okay? And again, I'm pretty sure Cindy probably touched on this, so again, I apologize, but they're really 4, and I do a lot of outreach on this these days. Jessica Trask, one of my analysts, does as well. And there's really, you can kind of break it down into 4 areas that are important as it relates to disclosing international activities or outside activities. And actually, some of this applies not just to international activities, it applies to outside activities. the contracts and grants requirements, other support, current pending support, foreign component, the COI requirements, NIH particularly, and NSF in terms of reporting outside activities which may constitute a conflict of interest. The separate conflict of commitment, which is reporting outside activities through your department channels, and then more generally, export control compliance. Yes, maybe overlap. Those are my words. There are overlap in some of the information that has to be disclosed. It has been my dream, no, not that boring, but it's my hope that someday we'll have a system where our researchers can go in online, just answer some questions, insert their outside activities, and all the forms and people and departments just get notified as required. Unfortunately, we don't have that system. We've asked for it, and the money's just not there to build that system. So in some cases, you're going to have to, unfortunately, your researchers are going to have to put information down twice, possibly 3 times. I feel the pain. There's nothing we can do about it at this point. So I guess the point there is don't assume if your researchers list an outside activity on their outside activity report under, what is it, 025 for main campus and 671 for the health system, that complies with these other areas. It likely doesn't actually in terms of reporting it. And I can tell you, once again, I can tell you there is both the government and outside entities, public interest groups that are requesting these documents, which are public documents for the most part, and they are comparing. What are these investigators reporting internally? Is it consistent? For the physicians as well, there's something called the Open Payments Database, which requires manufacturers who provide money to physicians for things like outside consulting. There's actually a public database that lists, and that information goes in by the manufacturers, and we have public interest groups that are looking at that information, requesting the internal documents and saying, whoa, this manufacturer said you got $500,000 for consulting when internally you told your university it was only $5,000 or didn't report it at all. So that's happening. Okay, so what I also want to do, and I guess I don't know what my time limit is.
Keep going.
Yeah,
You have enough time.
I don't. Well, yeah, I don't want to. Okay, yeah. Don't tempt me. So what I want to do now is, again, I said I'm doing a lot of outreach and looking at specific matters, and I'm seeing and talking with colleagues at other UC campuses and other institutions, and there's kind of some general trends I'm seeing as to potential misunderstanding or mistakes being made. And I want to focus on just a couple, if I could. So when it comes to contracts and grants related reporting, NIH and NSF and other support, and again, I don't want to, you guys know this a lot better than I do, so let me start there. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking down to you, but what we have seen in some instances is researchers know about other support and that obligation to inform NIH and NSF of their other research endeavors, but sometimes there's a misunderstanding as to what is the scope of that disclosure obligation, meaning sometimes investigators think, well, I only have to disclose other research activities that relate to my NIH project or my NSF project, right? We have a lot of great researchers, and sometimes their projects, they do projects privately funded and projects NIH, and they don't have any connection. Obviously a good thing, but the rules, and this rule has been clear, this is not a new twist by NIH, is you have to disclose to NIH and or NSF all other support, if you will, for your research endeavors, regardless if it's connected to your NIH or NSF research activities. And the point there is the government wants to decide if there's overlap, not basically allowing the investigator to do that. And then kind of secondary to that, although it's worthy of mention, is it's not just financial support for your outside research endeavors. If there's lab support, if there's personnel support, and again, you can apply this to a foreign context, or you can, apply it to to an institution down the street as far as outside activities, if it's not, doesn't just focus on financial support for research endeavors, okay? Foreign component. Again, I'm positive you all know about this in general terms, but foreign component basically is different than other support, and that is an obligation to disclose, and in some cases get prior approval when your NIH or NSF project, the words are significant component, although don't assume that means that's not, I mean, I understand significant sounds like, well, I have to be doing a lot outside the country. NIH, I can tell you, because I've been in conferences, they've kind of reduced the definition of significant to what I don't think would be significant. We're not taking notes, right? But if any component of your NIH, NSF research is going to take place outside the country, then that likely, if it's significant particularly, will need to be reported to NIH or NSF. And possibly other federal and other sponsors too. I'm limiting it to NSF and NIH only because that's the bulk of our sponsored research on the federal government side. And then foreign affiliation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but that's yet another kind of category to be mindful of. Again, bottom line here is call us, please, if you're in doubt. Okay. It's not going to work. Anyway. What this is, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, is there's a question. This is that fact sheet and we'll send out these slides. I think we sent out the slides, right? Okay, that we mentioned that NIH has. I think it's not very long, believe it or not. Usually, you know, the government stuff goes on forever. This is like 3 pages. It's worth printing it out or reading it, in my opinion, particularly these days. But there's a question here about appointment at a foreign university. At the foreign site, they have access to lab resources, research materials, and how the response is written by NIH is, and again, I've heard them say this at conferences, NIH representatives, is they expect any foreign affiliation, you receive an honorary professorship at a foreign institution, particularly if there's any aspect that involves some sort of research, particularly. Again, maybe lab support, maybe you're supervising students who are doing research. Regardless if you're getting income, this is now in the other support category for NIH, I'd apply it to NSF too. The government saying we expect, this includes titled academic, professional, and institutional appointments, whether or not remuneration is received and whether full-time, part-time, or voluntary, including adjunct, visiting, and honorary. So, again, you can debate whether this is kind of a new interpretation by NIH. They claim it's not. It doesn't matter. They're now saying here's how we're approaching it going forward. I don't know if we want to do it now or I have more slides. Question? So okay, so this is now really in the weeds, and again, most of you know this. These are the sections on the NIH Progress Reports, the annual Progress Reports, that are germane to these areas, and I kind of mentioned those before. So, and again, you guys probably know this and can teach this section better than I can. So spit now going to COI, which is an area my unit specifically handles, COI disclosures. Yeah, varies by funding source, as you know. Again, going back to what I'm seeing as a potential kind of mistake, for NIH purposes, the PHS disclosure, there's an exemption from reporting income from a United States higher education institution, but that exemption to disclosure does not apply to foreign governments or foreign institutions of higher education. It's not like, doesn't jump out at you in the regulations, but it is in there and it's always been in there. And sometimes we're seeing our researchers say, well, hey, I got this stipend or whatever. I went to this conference at this university, was a speaker, but I got paid by the foreign school. So I didn't think I had to disclose it. You do. If you reach the threshold, which is 5,000, we're not going to get into great deals on that. Another area, again, this goes a little beyond foreign influence, but I think it's worth looking at because I'm looking at some of these issues now, is when it comes to PHS reporting on your CII and your COI disclosure, the online eCOI that we have. Unlike the 700U, which really relates one-to-one, is the PI involved in any outside activities with the sponsor? That's a kind of a one-to-one question. When it comes to the PHS disclosure rules, since 2012, and I won't get into all the changes they made, but what happened in 2012 was the federal government said, you have to report, you researcher, NIH-funded researcher, all of your significant financial interests related essentially to your expertise. That's what this means, institutional responsibilities. Again, regardless of whether it relates to your NIH projects. So prior to 2012, and this is actually still the case with NSF, the investigator decided, okay, I'm doing this outside consulting for company A. I have NIH projects. This outside consulting doesn't relate, meaning the company doesn't have an interest in the outcome and so on. And that may be perfectly accurate. Therefore, I don't have to put it down on my NIH disclosure at all. I don't even have to disclose it. That was fine before 2012. And that's, for whatever reason, still fine as to NSF disclosures. But as of 2012, all those outside activities, again, above the thresholds, have to be reported. The government's thinking there, Chairman Grassley, was we're not going to let a potentially conflicted investigator make the decision whether it's related, because that, in a way, in and of itself, is a conflict. We're going to shift the burden to the institution to decide if it's related. And again, I'm emphasizing that because I am seeing instances, more than I would like, where, in this case, it's like outside consulting is not being listed on NSF disclosures, and learning that, oh, I didn't think I had to disclose it because this activity is unrelated. Now, yeah, maybe it's no harm, no foul, but the fact is it has to be disclosed, right? And you don't want to be in defensive mode if some of these public interest groups come in and start, you know, getting their hands and stuff. Still okay?
Yes,
Time-wise?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Hold on a second. Oh, okay. So NSF, well, I'm not going to go into details on NSF. NSF, it is the responsibility of the investigator, like it was with NIH before 2012, to decide if that outside activity is related to the NSF research. But all I guess I would say in this case, particularly in this particular environment and climate, is take a broad view of what's related. And again, if you have any doubts, ask us. If it's obviously not related, then you're entitled, you don't have to disclose it. But if there's any doubt, again, I would suggest talking with us or disclosing it. All right, I kind of mentioned this, right? Outside activities, I'm not going to go into great detail again. This is separate and apart from COI disclosures. And this is not an area I directly handle, although I get more and more involved in understanding these rules as we look at specific matters. Those are the policies. And again, I'm happy to either answer questions at some point, or I can refer you to who could answer those questions if I can't in this area. Do you have anything to add on, I don't know if you have on the conflict from the outside reporting?
No, we don't work on
I know.
conflict of commitment.
Okay, and then I think finally, whoops. So export control compliance. I think I've talked in here about export control generally. I still am not a big fan of even using the words export control, because you ask somebody off the street, and if it was me before I started this job, I'd think, okay, export, you have an item, then you're just exporting it out of the country, right? Well, there's a heck of a lot more to this whole umbrella of export control than that. Sharing control technology with foreign persons overseas or in your lab can potentially require licensing. International research collaborations, traveling to embargoed countries, sanctioned countries like Iran or Syria or North Korea, which again, we're not saying you can't do it. And well, certainly we have a lot of activity with our researchers and colleagues in Iran. And again, nobody's saying that's a good thing, but particularly when it comes to these embargo countries, there are very special rules that actually continue to change somewhat. And any time any of your researchers are doing work with a sanctioned country, I think my strong recommendation is don't even hesitate. The first step is to call us because we want to, and it's not always common sense either whether a license is required.
Repeat the question, please.
That's a good question. As to tribal, I mean, on COI disclosure, that's a good question. Huh. Yeah, well, I don't think, and I'm looking at Jessica and you guys, I don't know if there are any exceptions, if you will, for doing outside consulting or getting income from a essentially it's a separate sovereign, a tribal entity. But I'm going to look. That's a good question. We don't see that very often, but yeah. Again, when in doubt, call us. And obviously we don't know the answer, so we'd have to look it up. Yeah. Finally, on our website, Jessica and I put together I don't even call it a fact sheet, a one-pager. It's both on the website as well as there's a link to a shorter version of pretty much kind of the resources and the kind of stuff we just talked about. So if all this didn't absorb today, which I guarantee it, I hope it doesn't, or I'm very impressed with you guys. Right here, go to the Policy and Compliance, Office of Research website down here, International Relations and Activities, and you'll get this link, and then all this stuff will look familiar to you. And the final thing I want to say is, and then we can ask, I guess there's only one more question left before I start charging another $400, is we're always happy. I'm always happy. My unit's always happy. If you want to set up a session in your department with, could be 1, could be 10, could be everyone in the department where we could go over some of this stuff. Because sometimes it's more powerful if somebody like the research compliance director delivers the message as to, you saying, well, I heard something about this kind of thing. So, all right, questions?
There won't be any charge for questions, so keep asking.
Yeah.
So it's a statement and some questions. So COI doesn't mention conflicts between a PI and their sibling who may have a majority interest in a company that has been selected by the PI as a subrecipient, not previously disclosed. Do we now disclose this? How does COI include sibling relationships?
I think I'm following the question. The disclosure obligation, siblings, applies to, so brother or sister, yeah, applies not only to the investigator, but their immediate family, right? But I don't know if that means siblings.
Right.
I'm looking at you two.
Yeah, it's not siblings.
Wife for sure, children. It's a very good question, whoever asked it.
Spouse and dependent children, but this is for financial conflict of interest.
Okay, right.
If you are subawarding to a company that is owned by the investigator's family, there is a different set of rules because there are customs and
yeah, there are two different,
yeah.
I have two different issues here. Craig, you were talking about, as Jessica correctly said, is that actually the language of the law is the spouse, as well as and dependents, children, as well as the what's the word, the partners, domestic partners. That's a part of it too. That's for conflict of interest. They know on 700U what they have to disclose. If any of those individuals have received money from the source and so on and so forth. The question, if I understood correctly, has to do with issuing a sub-award. We have an award here, and we want to issue a sub-award, and sub-awardee is a sibling. So the answer to that question is that used to be handled the issues of that type of conflict in the business contracts. And Paula, what's the name of the form? There was BIS 43, policy is there. So basically, right, it has to do with, as Paula said, issuing a sub-award to near relative, and near relative is defined as brothers, sisters, uncles, and so on and so forth. So there is a different process from the conflict of interest that you go through that has to be looked at. It used to be at the business contract, and more it seems like our office has to look at it. And we have had some cases that we had to figure out what to do. So that's a completely different issue than the conflict of interest that
Yeah,
Craig
exactly.
takes care of.
Thank you for the clarification. And I think actually there's a, and again, I don't handle that aspect of it. At least there was a form that's filled out.
Yes,
And one of
yes.
the questions on the form touches on this particular question, whether or not there's any connection in this regard
Yeah, in
to
the
the
old system,
subrecipient.
in the old system, we had the data sheet had a question on that.
Okay.
On the second page of data sheet. I don't remember how it is handled in CAIUS right now, but it used to be in the,
Disappeared. And I weren't aware of it. So I updated a couple of requests.
Mhm.
There was a,
I don't think anybody can hear you, Paula, that
Oh,
you are
sorry.
talking. What?
I can repeat it maybe. One minute.
So the fact that you have put it on the form, that's the part that you want to explain.
So the question is currently on the subaward request form. It used to be on our old data sheet, but when CAIUS was implemented, there was a time when the question had disappeared, so there was a little gap in time. But now it is currently there, and I think I'm aware of this one particular instance that I believe that the question is being asked of. So if you have specific questions, just email me directly, and I'll work with Ahmad on that possible conflict of interest. There's ways to manage it. There's ways to oversee it. Justifications to ensure that maybe, the brother sister's company is the only company that can do this sort of work for this particular research. So
Right.
there's ways to work around that.
Correct.
Which is another kind of more general point of all those four kind of categories, COI, COC. There may be other things floating out there like this. It's kind of unfortunate we're so siloed in some of this, but we are right at this point. So, are there?
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any more questions. Do you, Cassie? Nope.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
That was great.